acquiring Malibu to roll the Ultraverse back into the Marvel Universe. And so that was the end of Eternity in 1994.
Also, at the time, Eternity was experimenting with different titles like Elf Lord. And the big thing about Eternity also, if you look at Scott Rosenberg's name, this was not an Eternity book or a Malibu book, but Tommy alluded to MIB. He also did a movie with Daniel Craig, Cowboys versus Aliens. And so and also, if those of you who've been to Comic-Con in San Diego, he had a thing called, I forgot the name of the competition, it was like a Comic Book Idol. And his company at the time, Platinum Studios, funded that for the exact same reason that Eternity was founded, except he wanted to go to street level. He wanted to get the person who was desperate to get their concept out and would just basically do anything. And what he would do was give them a contract and have them produce a one-shot comic. And it was most of the time, I think he did it for 3 years, and I think they were published digitally. They were never published in hard copy form. And that's why Comic Idol faded, because it didn't fulfill the promise and the potential that it was originally based on.
Well, it was similar to what Tokyopop was doing with Rising Stars of Anime.
Right, exactly. It was basically the same pattern.
Yeah. So then, eventually...
And at the bottom of the barrel, you'll find me.
No, actually, your stuff was pretty good. I mean, yeah, this is when you notice how the number of comics and the variation in quality starts, varying more and more wildly as we go forth. But Academy Comics was founded by Mark Panicia. He's actually this really, really driven guy. I actually met him back in the 90s, right after he closed up Academy. And he was at Wildstorm trying to get back into one of the big companies, either DC or Marvel. And lo and behold, within a few years, he ended up at Marvel. Now he's managing X-Men for Marvel. Yeah.
He cut his teeth working for Rob Liefeld at Extreme Studios. He was one of Liefeld's proteges, along with Greg Capullo, who did a huge run on Spawn. Stephen Platt, who started on Prophet and did Moon Knight for Marvel. And then, I'm trying to remember, he was Dan Panosian, who worked on Cable. And I'm trying to remember, there was there was an episode of Overhauling where they overhauled his Firebird, and I'm trying to remember, he was an artist worked with Rob, and he did some Conan stuff for Dark Horse as well. And his name escapes me right now, but yeah, these are people who, they all have a connection with Image and kind of spawned into, and Mark ended up doing Academy. And basically Academy just existed for the Robotech comics, if I remember correctly. Is that correct, Sean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it started off doing these like vampire goth comics.
Yeah.
And then they had to retitle themselves really quickly to go more mainstream for the Robotech stuff. And so they changed their name to Academy.
Yeah.
And I'd like to, if you have a moment, Sean, to explain like the process over at Academy, because there's such a huge volume of Robotech titles that Academy did, besides Sentinels, that most people forget, because there's some that are like, straight off of Robotech. Like they continued Return to Macross. They did stuff that was straight with characters like Excalibur and Warriors. But then you go all the way down to Mordecai and Clone, which is like completely off the reservation.
I think, I mean, I had such a good time working for Academy, doing the books. I mean, it was so fun. We were at the end of the run of the popularity of the franchise at that point, you know what I mean? So we were like the last outpost of people trying to carry the torch, but God, was it fun. And I think because it was a little more loosey-goosey, they would let certain creators sort of take stories off into a direction that they wanted to. So there was that sort of subset of people that would do this sort of more gothy stuff, and then there were people like me that was just like Macross all day long, and I was just like, I could not get enough of it. And you know, we didn't have a group of guys and girls or talented artists sitting in a, you know, that sort of romantic thing with the Kamiko stuff. You know, you had a pizza place across the street, and you drew together, and you're awesome. You know, like in Chasing Amy. You know, with the two guys, you know, up there. You know, they're the Bank Hold Up Studios. Yeah.
Or like the Marvel bullpen.
Yeah, or even, you know, in Warner Brothers, like Termite Terrace and all that stuff. You just get a group of creatives in a room. But we were so spread out that each artist was sort of left to tend to their own box, so to speak. And I mean, it was a little bit like the Wild West, because I had just started working professionally, and I hadn't gone to LA yet to work in animation. And it was literally, you had 30 days, I had 30 days, for each issue. And I had to do pencils, inks, letters, and a color cover, and just fire through it and get out. It is a miracle that I made any deadline. And I mean, and it's simultaneously painful and exhilarating for me to see the scope of the books, because the first one that I did was so bad. And going all the way up through, you know, the last book that I did, which I had actually transitioned over to California, and I forget the editor that I was dealing with, I can't remember her name now. She was such a nice lady. I want to say her name was Jean. She had sort of like a Minnesota accent, and she was real nice on the phone, you know. I mean, she was like so sweet. I don't think she knew anything about Robotech. She was like, "Oh, we got your artwork, it looks good." And she was just the sweetest person to deal with. And so it was very mom and popish like that, but they really, really gave me the opportunity to grow as an artist and sort of really give back to the Robotech franchise what it gave to me, which was basically my religion in the 80s. You know, and I mean, it's so great. I don't know about any of you out there, but seeing the old Kamiko and all the old covers on the screen, I'm like, okay, I have that. I've got boxes at home with I remember how they smell. I remember just poring over that first issue that Maycheck and those guys did with the cell painting. I was like, why don't they all look like this? And now, of course, you know why. But it was an exhilarating sort of ride, and some of the best early work I've ever done. You know what I mean? It still pains me to look at it, but you know, I was really thankful to it, and I hope you guys look like you're doing a nice future to get that back. And I think enough time has passed now that there's a whole new generation of people that are ready to love it like we did. So I think it's kind of an exhilarating time for just the property in general, you know. So does that answer any questions?
Thank you very much. Oh, go ahead.
I think also Academy also has another artist named Tavisha Wolfcott.
Tavisha.
Yes,
She's amazing.
She is now doing Tabby Cat comics on the web, and her husband, Rosarick Simmons, is also working for
He had worked on Invader Zim.
Yes,
Yeah, that's very cool.
and he does wrestling too.
Nice. And that couple, they're the ones who did Clone and Mordecai,
Yep.
the more goth versions of Robotech.
But it fit in with their
At
personality.
that
Yes.
time, Ricky was kind of a goth dresser too.
Actually, okay, those comics were actually most close to the books they were doing before they picked up the Robotech license. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I got a question for you. I see your artwork here for Academy Blues. This is actually pretty good. You know, among the Academy Comics lineup. But then there's this one that I was surprised I didn't realize that you had written Macross Tempest.
I didn't.
Well, so why were you credited as a writer for that?
They asked me at the time,
Yeah.
and it was just as I had started working in animation, they asked me if I knew any other artists they wanted to work on it. And I recommended somebody who was a huge Robotech and Macross fan, and halfway through the book, he said, "I'm too busy, I don't have time." And he just dropped it.
Wow.
And the editor lady called me in a panic. She's like, "Can you help me finish this?" And I'm like, "I'm busy too," but, you know, she's like, please, and I felt bad because I had recommended the guy, and he was like, I don't understand how somebody could do that. They're like, "Oh, I'm busy, I can't do this anymore." Like, they have a press, you know, it has to go to press in 2 weeks. So I had to help finish 10 pages and half rewrite the script because that had gone away for some reason as well. It was not a great collaboration. It was literally trying to pick up as much as you can and make it look good before, you know, so it's really, I don't think my name should be on it. But it is.
Well, I was looking at the cover and I was thinking, this looks like 50 Shades of Macross.
Yeah, it ain't me. Yeah. And I got some hate mail over that one. I'm like, I swear to God, I'm sorry. I apologize.
The irony is it lived up to its title because it was a Tempest behind the scenes.
Oh, it was one of those, and that was literally at the end of like Academy. You know what I mean? So it was, you know, one of the last sort of chunks of books they put out, and I think it was just different.
Well, you were mentioning that they had a Minnesota accent. I think they were based out of Indiana.
Were they really?
Yeah.
They're Midwestern.
I know the lady who talked on the phone was so sweet. She always sounded like a mom. She was really cool.
And then, oh yeah, by the way, when you were saying Loosey Goosey, then it went to Antarctic Press after that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And
That looks more tightly put together than Academy, but, you know. It's,
well, when it started, one of the things that Antarctic Press brought to the table was they were going to introduce more color into Robotech comics. So most of the Robotech comics at Academy and Eternity were black and white, and they promised to return to color. And also Ben Dunn was also a huge anime fan, and Ninja High School. And
so was Ted Nomura, Tigers of Terra. Yeah, those two guys, they lobbied big time to get Robotech.
Yeah.
Big time.
So some of the series in there were actually pretty well received, like the Rolling Thunder subplot that ran within their Robotech series. That was by Fred Perry, and Fred had actually served in the armed forces, so he brought his own sensibility to it.
He served in the Armored Corps, right?
Yeah. Did he? Oh, that detail I didn't know.
Yeah, he was in Operation Blade Storm.
Yeah.
That's no joke.
Yeah, so he like, you know, when we had the chance to speak with him briefly at Comic-Con, he really, you know, he said everything that he experienced when he was in Desert Storm, he kind of used that as his filter for Rolling Thunder.
Yeah, I remember him mentioning that. Yeah. Now, two guys who lobbied to get back in on the Robotech comics when it went to Antarctic Press were John and Jason Waltrip.
Yep.
And they had worked on 4 volumes corresponding with the first 4 novels of the Sentinels.
huge body of work.
And they wanted to do one more volume. And they were negotiating with Antarctic, but for some reason or another, Antarctic assigned the job to someone else. So what happened was, in the bottom right, you'll see Robotech the Sentinels Rubicon, which was supposed to be based on the last novel. But for those who had followed the Waltrip's run, it didn't fit him particularly smoothly. It looked like a completely different interpretation. So that was interesting. But later on, we ended up linking up with the Waltrips again after that.
Now, what's interesting is if you look at the lower corner all the way down at the bottom, just next to Rubicon but below Escape, the previous panel spoke about the Holy Grail of Robotech Collectibles. The Holy Grail of Robotech Comics is that book, Crystal Dreams, which was based on a non-released or unreleased video game. And the reason why it's the Holy Grail of Robotech Comics is the gaming company that had the rights to that produced 3,000 comics through Antarctic. They were going to distribute them at E3. They ended up...
That's not correct.
Is that not correct?
That's not correct.
Okay, because...
they produced 300.
Oh, they 300? Okay, because one of the things I heard from the Antarctic guys was that, anyways, it was distributed through E3, and they ended up pulping most of them.
Yes.
Because
Oh, you know what? Okay.
they couldn't distribute.
All right, that might be why there's only 300 of them.
Yeah.
Is I think the majority of them were pulped.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it was
All right,
there was
right.
3,000
Yeah.
produced, as I recall, speaking to the gentleman, and because he was one of the game programmers and
Yeah.
one of the owners of the company. They produced 3,000 for E3. They distributed 300 because the game was basically brutalized by the gaming press because it was a difficult game to play unless you knew Robotech. It was a very difficult game to play, and they distributed 300 and then allegedly pulped the rest. So 2,700 copies. Instead of trying to sell them off to comic book retailers, they just nuked them. And so it's the single hardest Robotech comic book to get. And that's why if you go on eBay, there's one currently on sale for, they're asking over $300 for it.
So if you look at the circulation number in some of the later Robotech books, some of them actually printed their circulation numbers, and I think the lowest I've ever seen them go is like maybe 1,000 and some change. And so this was even a third of that, and it was given away as a freebie at E3, and the majority of those were probably thrown away. So that means that this probably is most likely the hardest to find of all of those.
I believe you have, according to Steve, who's also one of the archivists, Steve Yoon at Harmony Gold, he said that he believes there's one copy of Harmony Gold, one, in your archive. And I've already suggested that he get it to CGC and get it slabbed. So that way at least you guys can display it without having it get further damaged if there's any damage to it.
So Antarctic Press was founded by Ben and Jo Ming Dunn in Texas. And you might be really surprised to find out that they're Star Trek fans.
And yeah, Joe is actually a doctor. Ben, he was the one who basically funded Antarctic Press so that his brother Ben could do Ninja High School. And basically the company was founded on one book, and it spun, and they actually were able to get Tigers of Terra because Ted Nomura, the creator of that book, was a huge fan of Joe's. Joe was a huge fan of Ted's, and so when they met at San Diego Comic-Con one year, Ted just said, I'm tired of doing the business and the publishing, can you print the book for me? And they just basically did a handshake deal right there. And so that's how their association has lasted now for over 20 years.
And Ted's a big-time Robotech fan as well. In fact, when you got the opportunity to do Robotech, he had one specific issue in mind for me and a certain other Robotech artist named Colin Dorham. We were actually pictured in one of the episodes of his comic book where we killed off a Messiah 4 on Grant.
Was this the Tiger Cat run?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was during what ended up being called Robotech Variants when they produced it as a graphic novel.
And I did the back cover.
So the most recent company to have the license now was DC and Wildstorm. Now with DC Comics, they have the DCU, and so that's their bread and butter. And so you'll notice by the number of comics in lineup, their survival doesn't depend on them spamming the universe with Robotech comics every single month. So they have a smaller number of comics produced in high quality color. And so these books started in 2002 with the first Robotech miniseries, which ended up being packaged as From the Stars. And then there was Robotech Love and War, which was an expansion of the Max and Miria storyline. And it also had a subplot attached to it, which was Robotech Little White Dragon, which was what if it was actually expanding on the plot of Little White Dragon, which was the Chinese action movie that they were filming aboard the SDF-1.
Yeah, it's the one with Min Mei and Kyle.
Kyle, yeah. And then Robotech Invasion was a tie-in to the video game, which was based in the New Generation. And this one was based on other characters besides Scott Bernard. In the Invasion comic miniseries, it focused more on Lancer prior to Scott's arrival on Earth. And for that one, we actually had the original artist, character designer,
Amano Sensei.
yeah, Yoshitaka Amano, do the covers for this miniseries. That was a huge get for us because he was working for Vertigo at the time as their cover artist, and so
He was working on Death and Sandman.
yeah, so since he was under that DC Comics umbrella, it was easy for them to get him to do some artwork.
And that title has this distinction of having the only original anime source artist working on the American version of his property. So that was when you say it's a huge get, it was monumental. They made basically his covers were the variant covers, but they were the most sought after ones as opposed to the regular covers. The regular covers were great because they were done by Udon, correct? Studio Udon. And they were great, but for some reason, well, obvious reason, his covers just blew out the shelf. So those are the ones that are harder to find.
And then backup story to that one was Robotech Mars Base 1. This one elaborated on the story of Carl Reber, whatever happened to him on Mars before Lisa got there. And the other tie-in series that came after that was Robotech Prelude to the Shadow Chronicles. That was the series where we actually got the Waltrops back involved. They wanted to bridge their second-to-last Sentinels comic series and put a cap to that. So we let them bridge their second-to-last series into Shadow Chronicles. And so they took Rubicon, the broad strokes of Rubicon, and kind of rejiggered the storyline to fit in with the Shadow Chronicles. And they were very, very happy to work on that project. And then the most recent project we had is Robotech Voltron. Since Dynamite had the license to Voltron, that was a crossover project between DC and Dynamite.
So, and if you notice, ironically, it comes full cycle. It's the Robotech title originally started at DC. Now the Robotech title here, as of Robotech Voltron, is still being published by DC that we know.
What was interesting is Bob Schreck, who had worked at not Dynamite, he worked at Comico.
Yeah, he's Diana Schutz's ex-husband.
Yeah. He ended up becoming an editor at DC when they picked up the Robotech license. So it was really nice how everything just all came full circle. Yeah.
He was also, he made his name being the group editor for the Batman franchise for DC for, I believe, almost a decade. So, like, all of the really cool, amazing Batman stories that happened late 90s, post-millennium, it was under his watch.
So now to go into a little bit of backstory of DC and Wildstorm, it was founded in San Diego, California by Jim Lee. And it was acquired by DC Comics in 1998. What had happened was Wildstorm became well known as the high-tech studio. It was the studio that had all the computer coloring. And their books were doing such incredible numbers. They were outselling, Marvel and DC books that this was the office building that Jim ended up moving into. It's this swanky office building right on the beach in La Jolla, California, which was the most expensive real estate in San Diego. And when DC was acquiring them in 1998, we were all scared, oh, we're gonna lose this building. There's no way they're gonna continue the lease on this expensive building because it was like $4 a square foot. No, this is $1998, okay? $4 a square foot was unbelievable prices. Only defense contractors would pay for offices like that. And when the staff at Wildstorm let DC know, what they were paying for their lease, they were afraid that DC would say, oh, go find something cheaper, right? And then all of a sudden DC said, okay. And they renewed the lease for another bunch of years. And then we found out later that their skyscraper on Broadway in Manhattan was over $10 a square foot. Yeah, so they were like, whatever.
Another thing, or one kind of post-trivial for the old location for Wildstorm is, how many of you remember the primetime soap opera, The OC, and the subplot that they had where some of the characters were creating their own graphic novel and they were pitching to Wildstorm? Wildstorm let them use their name, but they didn't let them shoot at their offices. Because the offices that you saw in the TV series was actually a set. And it didn't even bother to replicate the San Diego location. The reason why they didn't let them shoot at the offices was because Wildstorm was working on a lot of top secret type projects and they're developing things, and so they couldn't have a TV production crew going in their offices shooting their artists and stuff, doing cameos, walk-ons and stuff, because they were just way too busy doing stuff for DC.
Yeah, if they were doing their own properties, it would have been easy.
Yeah.
It's our own stuff, we don't care. But at the time, Wildstorm was also one of the strongest licensing companies at the time. They had the rights to Star Trek comics.
Yep.
They had rights to all these. And what's interesting was after DC acquired Wildstorm, their licensing department became redundant because DC had its own licensing department. And so the majority of Wildstorm's licensing department, when they found out that they were redundant with DC, ended up leaving, and that licensing department became IDW. So it's interesting to see how this kind of lineage forms. And Jim, who was being acquired by DC, ended up, it was kind of almost like a Steve Jobsian thing,
Yeah.
is the guy who was getting acquired ended up becoming the publisher of the company that he got acquired by.
Yeah, and what's funny is he founded Wildstorm on the basis of being able to create his own stuff and to be able to get behind the drawing table and draw again. And ironically, now he's more on the business end.
Well, also, his part of what drove his meteoric rise at DC was that his interpretation of Batman was the
Yes.
one that was selling.
Yes.
So whenever he did All-Star Batman, the sales would fly through the roof. Whenever they did, like the Arkham game series,
Yes.
based on his interpretation of Batman, that was the one that was basically selling. And so, that's why basically over at the DC universe, Jim and Dan DiDio are pretty much king.
Yeah, pretty much.
So anyway, I kind of went off on a tangent there. One of the things that was interesting, one of the licenses that they picked up was Speed Racer. And this was an interesting experiment back then. This was before the Transformers Dreamwave comics came out. And so I was actually working at Wildstorm in '90.